Welcome, everybody. If we have not met before, I am Dave Glazer in Colorado. I am a dating and relationship coach where I specialize in working with clients to develop interpersonal and intrapersonal relationships through self-awareness and the Enneagram. Today, I want to introduce you to how to use the Enneagram. For today's conversation, we're going to use the Enneagram 9. It's known as the Peacemaker. It typically is known to have all 9 types within it. So, what I'm going to do today is by introducing you to the Enneagram, it's going to give you a mirror or a reflection of who you are and how you show up. So, if you know your Enneagram type, post it in the comment section below here on YouTube or shoot me a message on social media on TikTok at Dave Glazer or on Instagram at Coach Dave Glazer. Send me a screenshot of your results. If you're new to the Enneagram, head on over to 9types.com, take the RETI version, RHETI, screenshot your results, send them to me on social media, and I will send you more information on how to learn more about your own Enneagram type. So let's dig in. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen here. This document is taken straight from the men's group challenge. We call it the challenge group because I am the challenger on the Enneagram. I'm a type 8, which means that I like to challenge people to think outside the box, do things nonconformist and a little bit unconventionally. And that's how I show up in my coaching group. So this particular document is week 1 of our coaching program, where I teach my members how to use the Enneagram for self-awareness and developing relationships between themselves, coworkers, family members, and romantic relationships. So if you're interested in how the Enneagram as a tool can be used to build better relationships with yourself and others, then shoot me a message and see if you're the right fit for the program. All right, let's dig in. Modern dating, the Enneagram, self-awareness, and leadership is the foundational core values of our group coaching program. So let's start with the Peacemaker. This is what's known as the crown of the Enneagram. The Enneagram diagram is laid out like this with the Peacemaker at the top because it has all 9 types within it. Like I said earlier, it's known to be the shapeshifter on the Enneagram. So the Peacemaker is going to be able to relate to the majority of the Enneagram types. They're known as a wallflower or a people pleaser or a shapeshifter. They kind of morph into what the situation and the environment needs them to be. They're either a mama bear or a papa bear. And I'll get into more about their type description here in a second. But specifically, this is the crown of the Enneagram. Peacemaker sits at the top. Like I said, I'm the challenger, type 8, which means I can relate a lot to the Peacemaker. They sit next to me on the Enneagram. My daughter is a Peacemaker, and so forth. So, moving on, this type 7 is the enthusiast. They invented FOMO. The loyalist is type 6 on the Enneagram. They play out what if scenarios every day, all day in their mind. They have worked out all possible scenarios in their head before things even happen. The investigator type 5 down here, they're known to go down a rabbit hole on YouTube or dig into researching in a book. They might be withdrawn into a book. That might be a way that you could identify yourself as the investigator or a romantic partner as an investigator. Uh, Type 4, the individualist. These are people who tend to be drawn towards emo music. They're very dramatic. It's like worst case scenario, but not in a played out kind of a way. It's really just the drama that they bring to a conversation. And that's the individualist. They want to be seen as special, and that's totally okay. They are the 4 on the Enneagram. And notice this gap right here at the bottom. The advanced diving deep into the Enneagram explains why there's a gap here and why these points of integration don't connect down here at the bottom. But I will talk about that at a more advanced level in the future. Up next, we have the achiever, type 3. My partner is the achiever, and they are known to pour themselves into work, find a lot of value out of value in themselves through work, and that's the achiever. You can find them to be CEOs, lawyers, doctors. Well, any Enneagram type can be those things, but the achiever finds their self-worth in those roles. Up next, the helper, type 2. The helper is the people pleaser. They are known as like setting aside all of their own needs for the benefit of others, especially when they're not the healthiest version of themselves. And we're going to dig into the optimal levels of health here in a moment. But the helper, I like to use them as an example when it comes to optimal levels of health because they reflect back to me my own integrated best version of myself. And more on that in a little bit. And then finally, the reformer, type one, they stand on their soapbox. They stand up for social injustice. You might hear a reformer be a lawyer, be a politician, be a pastor in a church because they stand on their soapbox and they will let others hear about what they have to say about the world and the current events and how they perceive the world. So, like I said, we're going to focus on the peacemaker just as an example of how to use the Enneagram. This next resource comes straight from the Enneagram Institute. Head on over to the enneagraminstitute.com and you can read the entire type description. So each and every Enneagram type has this description. These are tendencies. These are things that are known to be like stereotypes of each of the type. But what this does for us is it helps us reflect back our best version of ourselves, but also the shadow version of ourselves. And that's essentially what the Enneagram does for us, is it provides a look into what's possible when we are growing and what's holding us back in our shadow, the things that we don't want to take a look at. So if anything rubs you the wrong way about the Enneagram, you're quite possibly looking at your own type because the Enneagram holds up a mirror and a reflection for you to take a look at your own shadow. But it also gives you a path to growing away from your shadow as well, or growing through your shadow is how I should say that. Because the path to growth is through our pain. So let's dig into Enneagram Type 9. Each and every type description has this breakdown at the Enneagram Institute. It's one of my resources that I go to, plus some additional books and resources that I can give you in the group program. Our group program meets weekly. We have a group for men and a group for women, and then once a month we come together as a combined group to learn and grow together through reflection and the mirror that we hold up for one another. So Enneagram type nines are accepting, trusting, and stable. They're usually creative, optimistic, and supportive, but can also be too willing to go along with others to keep the peace. Like I said, if they're in an environment in a room full of people at work, they might want to keep the peace. They might be the moderator or the mama bear, papa bear in the room that just kind of wants everybody to be calm, cool, and collected. And that's a great person to have in like human resources or as a counselor or as a group facilitator like myself. I can show up as the 9 quite a bit because it sits next to me on the Enneagram. More on Enneagram wings in a future call. They want everything to go smoothly and without conflict, but they can also tend to be complacent, simplifying problems and minimizing anything upsetting, which means that they don't look at their own shadow to avoid something serious, to avoid something detrimental. And if that sounds like you might be an Enneagram type 9, or if that sounds like somebody you care about, they might be an Enneagram type 9. One thing that I want to be very clear about the Enneagram, the typing system, is that we don't use it to label or project somebody. Oh, you do that because you're such a 9. We don't use that language when it comes to the Enneagram. This is a tool that can help us be very compassionate for others and actually learn to develop a more curious, compassionate way to approach other people. It's a great tool to help us navigate conflict. So if you have anger that shows up for you in your relationships, this is a great tool to understand partners and coworkers and family members and teammates a lot better. It's a multifaceted, multi-use tool that I've seen a lot of growth where I would coach my strength and conditioning elite level athletes through the Enneagram. I would also do it in my own personal partnership where I can understand my type 3, the achiever partner, a little bit better. So they typically have problems with inertia and stubbornness. So at their worst, they tend to go inward. They go into themselves and they become a recluse or they become, shut off from the world. Not in the same way as the type 5 that would go shut themselves off and go research everything they need to know about a topic. This is the type 9 that would actually become more catatonic. So at their best, they're indomitable and all-embracing. They're able to bring people together and heal conflicts, which is a great strength to have as an Enneagram Type 9. Now, here in the next section, we're going to lay out the basic fear of each Enneagram type. Each Enneagram type has a basic fear. Like mine is fear of vulnerability. Don't want to be seen as fallible, and that's my area of growth. I tend to be closed off as an Enneagram 8, but when I understand that vulnerability is the key to closeness and connectedness and intimacy with other people, whether that be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, or financial intimacy with another person, I need to understand that my basic fear holds me back from that. And the type 9's basic fear is of loss and separation. To be lost and separated from themselves, yes, that's how their inter personal relationship shows up. They don't want to lose themselves, but they have a tendency to do so, which is kind of you would think that that's a contradiction, but it's more like self-sabotage. And that's the shadow side of the 9 showing up. They have a basic desire, which is to have inner stability or peace of mind. I was just coaching a client the other day talking about how he wished that his father, who passed away recently, had peace wherever he was at. And that's the great integrated, healthy version of the 9, is to wish others in the world to have peace. We discussed briefly just what sits next to each other on the Enneagram, the crown of the Enneagram, and that's known as your wing. So a 9-wing 8 is known as the referee. They're actually going to dig into conflict in a group setting where they're going to be the moderator and the facilitator, wanting everybody to be conflict free. So they're going to kind of smooth things out. That's the referee, 9-wing 8. And the Enneagram 9 with one wing is known as the dreamer. Like I said earlier, the Enneagram 1, the reformer, has a social injustice cause that they are just standing on their soapbox for. So how the 9 with one wing shows up is at their best, they want to bring people together and heal conflicts. So if they have the wing 1, they're going to take a strong stance on abortion, bring people together and heal conflicts through abortion or through politics or through their church or through like the client I was discussing the other day, he's going to go to a no-kill shelter on Thanksgiving Day to help him pursue his social injustice in the world. And so he's a 9-wing 1, which was a great thing to discover. If that sounds like you might be in a 9-wing 1. And if that sounds like you or somebody you love, you may have a 9-wing 1 in your life. They're very compassionate. They're very passionate and go-getters, but they're going to do it from a place of groundedness and strength when they are at their best version of themselves. The key motivations. Each and every Enneagram type has key motivations. The 9, by chance, wants to create harmony in their environment, to avoid conflicts and tension, to preserve things as they are, to resist whatever would upset or disturb them. And this is, again, what the crown of the Enneagram looks like, with the 9 sitting at the top. And this is their path to growth, where they actually show up more like the achiever when they are on an integrated path. When we understand that our path to growth is a destination, it's something we can set our sights on, we can set our eyes on that goal, we become more like the achiever if you're a 9. Through a place of stress or disintegration, you become more like the 6, where the what if scenarios play out in your mind, but the ultimate goal by doing that is to heal the inner conflict that you have, right? So if the 9 goes into hiding or into a recluse period in their life, they might be playing out what if scenarios, right? But they do it alone. They do it in isolation, not solitude. There's a huge difference there. And like I said, the path to growth, become more like the achiever, where they're going to maybe pour themselves into that social injustice or their cause. They're going to go all in with it, and they're going to find a great sense of self-worth in doing so, but not their identity in that social cause, right? I hope that makes more sense about the path to growth and the path to disintegration or stress. More on this particular thing per the Enneagram type in another call. So stay tuned. There's more to come. Let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the Enneagram Type 9, otherwise known by this particular resource, the agreeable. I like to call them the Peacemaker per the Enneagram Institute. It's just what I'm more familiar with. Their strengths, they're tolerant of others, can mediate conflict. Again, remember HR or a pastor or a counselor or even a lawyer, you know. They're open-minded. They appreciate diverse points of view, creative and innovative, optimistic, and they value consensus. So they draw people in diverse groups, like an HR executive would do. Draw in diverse people and get a consensus so that we can propel the business forward. And that's when they're at their best. When they're at their worst, their weaknesses show up. This is also known as the shadow. They avoid confrontation, isolation, right? They go into a period of solitude or a period of recluse, right? They prioritize others' needs. Again, they can be a people pleaser, but in a mama bear, papa bear kind of a way. They have trouble sticking up for themselves. They minimize their feelings. Again, separation. Their basic fear is their loss of self, loss of their sense of self, and separation from self, right? But when they're at their worst, they self-sabotage by minimizing their own feelings and experience. They struggle to concentrate because they are so drawn inward into isolation that they have a hard time getting out of that rut, right? They tend to shut down in extremely intense situations. So do not come over the top in conflict with the Enneagram Type 9. They will tend to shut down. We'll dig into the triad, the head-centered triad, which is where anger comes into play with these three types, the 8, the 9, and the 1. They're all part of this head-centered or guts? They're gut-centered. The 8, the 9, and the 1 are all in the gut-centered triad, which is where they store their anger, right? And more on the triads in the future. There's the head center, heart center, and the gut center. And I can relate a lot to anger showing up in my life because I'm a type 8. But they sit next to each other as if they're like in a row, and they sit shoulder to shoulder with each other. And in this trio of Enneagram types, they can understand one another better, but they can also rub each other the wrong way, right? And so when anger shows up for them, this is an opportunity for the Enneagram Type 9, 8, and 1 to tune into where that anger is in their body. Is it in your gut? Is it in your chest? Is it in your head? And each type has a particular way of coping with the dominant emotion of its center. So the gut-centered triad, which these three types sit under, anger is their go-to emotion. So 9s deny their anger and instinctual energies as if to say, what anger? I'm not a person who gets angry. Again, their basic fear is loss of or separation from, and it's separation from self. So when anger shows up in their life, they have a tendency to separate themselves from that feeling of anger. Now, the type 8, I can relate a lot to that because we act out our anger and instinctual energies. We project it out into the world. People will be able to tell when we are angry. In other words, when I or the 8s feel anger building in them, they immediately respond to it in some physical way. Jiu-jitsu is an excellent grounding and somatic healing process and journey for me because of this, because the Enneagram reflects back to me that I need to immediately respond to it in some physical way. So if I'm regularly doing something challenging like weightlifting or jujitsu or Muay Thai or kickboxing or boxing class or some type of movement, some somatic work, I can actually process my anger a lot better than if I'm out of my routine. I'm not showing up at jujitsu. I'm injured. This is when anger shows up for me. So I can relate a lot to these three types in the gut-centered triad. Now let's talk about optimal levels of health. When each Enneagram type is at their best, they look at these healthy levels, right? These are check-in opportunities for us. And this is how the Enneagram is a great tool. Because when I'm at my best, or when the 9 is at their best, they become self-possessed, feeling autonomous and fulfilled. A step down from that, they're deeply receptive, accepting, unself-conscious, emotionally stable and serene, and so forth. And then another step below that at level 3 of optimal health, they're optimistic, reassuring, and supportive, have a healing and calming influence. Let's take a look at if an Enneagram Type 9 is a counselor. Let's just say that this is their zone of genius where they show up at work to the best of their ability. Somebody like their client, if they're a counselor, would feel very safe and the ability to be vulnerable in the presence of a 9 when they are at their optimal health. They have a calming influence, right? And all three of these versions of the Enneagram 9, when they're going towards that growth path, could be a very safe place for others to be, bringing about change or bringing about influence or just holding space for somebody else. So that's what I love about the 9 when they're at their best. When they are at average health, then we get down into level 4, 5, and 6. The 9 can tend to fear conflict, so become self-effacing and accommodating, idealizing others and going along to get along. That's their expression. When they are trending downward on the optimal levels of health, they're going along to get along, saying yes to things that they really don't want to do. And when we check in with ourselves at this moderate, average level of health, we can say, okay, what do I need to do in order to go back up the levels of optimal health? Movement, connection, verbally dumping, journaling, meditating, all of these somatic processing that can help us navigate oftentimes the emotion is anger, but we don't want to internalize anger like the Enneagram 9. But we also don't want to project it out onto everybody in our lives like the 8 has a tendency to do, taking immediate action on their anger. Progressing even lower in the average levels of health, they're active but disengaged, unreflective and inattentive. And again, if this sounds like you might be a 9, or if you know somebody who's like this when they are just kind of down in a rut, but not yet depressed, this is how they could show up. And then below that, they begin to minimize their own problems to appease others and to have peace at any price. They will abandon themselves, disconnect from themselves in order to have peace in their life. And this is an opportunity for the Enneagram 9 to look inward. How do I get out of this rut that's starting to go towards depression? So at the unhealthy levels, level 7, 8, and 9, this is on the lower end of optimal health, right? Can be highly repressed, undeveloped, and ineffectual, meaning like they just don't feel like they have a good impact in the world. Their life has no meaning. They feel incapable of facing problems. So this is when that counselor really needs to step in, or their men or women's group or their church group needs to step in and say, hey, I see you withdrawing. I see you spending a lot more time at home. How can I help? How can I support you right now? And then level 8, wanting to block out awareness of anything that could affect them. Again, disconnecting from self is their basic fear, but it's also the way that they self-sabotage. And then finally, at their worst, when they're feeling their worst, they finally become severely disoriented and catatonic, abandoning themselves completely, like calling in sick to work, not showing up for date night, not showing up for their family members, taking their food to their bedroom. All of these things can be at their worst. Now, this is when psychoses can start to show up at their least healthy, where multiple personalities kind of is how the type 9 is showing psychoses in their life, right? Generally corresponds with the schizoid or and dependent personality disorders, which, if that's relatable, please reach out. I have an extensive list of connections and network in your area in the United States and across the world of mental health professionals to help you navigate that. And then in the future, the next call that I'm going to be producing is on the Enneagram wings. Like I said, 9 wing 1 or 9 wing 8, right? And we will cover it in future calls. Again, subscribe to this YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast if you're listening to it on one of your Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Subscribe, leave me a review, and reach out on social media, on TikTok at Dave Glazer, on Instagram at Coach Dave Glazer with questions about the Enneagram. Don't hesitate to send me a screenshot of your results from 9types.com. Take the ready version, send me your results. And let's continue this conversation through the lens of the Enneagram. Take care. This is Dave Glazer in Colorado, wishing you health and happiness wherever you're at in the world. Talk to you soon.